Welcome back to the 13th Destiny podcast with Magnum. I am your host, James Magnum Cook, and we are back. Now, I've got a lot of things that have gone on, and some good, some bad in the last few weeks. Went on a little bit of a vacation, came back to a little bit of a surprise, but hey, you know what? Life goes on, and you just take the punches, and you deal with it. And that's the way I've always been, and the way I always will be. Have nothing harsh to say about the situation, and my life goes on. So anyway, long story, won't get into it on the podcast, but those who know what's been going on know the outside story, and well, that's the way it's going to be. There's not going to be any major discussion about that. But anyway, moving on to tonight's show. Before we get started into tonight's show, I just want to say that I appreciate local teacher Casey Bates for setting up me getting in touch with Gary Taylor of someone who works with the Empty Bowls project that will be featured on an upcoming show very soon. That's a charity thing, and we will be talking with him, as well as Chad Williams from Let's Talk. So we've got two upcoming guests that are locals that will be on the show very soon, and of course I am also going to be on Chad's show. So things are beginning to really expand on the podcast, and because I've been working on some things behind the scenes while I haven't been on, so that's a good thing. So for any negative that went on out there, all the positives are much better than the negatives, and I try to avoid the negatives as much as possible and keep moving forward in life, and that's the way everyone should be. So as tonight's show is about the Rattlesnake Ridge, mouth of Gasper, and Sally's Rock area, which I grew up in. Now, let's talk about some of the things. A lot of the locals that grew up in this area, we kind of call it Rattlesnake Ridge, but there are some mentions of that prior to this time. And one of the independent films that I did on Captive Audience, that particular horror film that we did was filmed in this area, and Rattlesnake Ridge was mentioned in the film as well. So it's kind of known to certain people that we've kind of called it that because of the amount of rattlesnakes that have been known to be in the area. Very rocky ground, very in between two rivers, and I have lived in that area, grew up in that area. The only time I wasn't in that area, of course, was the 8 years that I spent in Northeast Georgia, which was in my early adult teens to my 27, 28 years of life. So that time I spent most of my time in Northeast Georgia, but I grew up here and I came back here. I want to pardon me this morning. Just getting a little started today, trying to catch up the show that has now taken 3 days to get on the air. We had technical difficulties, but I'm kind of glad that we had the technical difficulties because I was able to mention about Gary and Chad and all that, having them on the shows and also being on Chad's show coming up. So that is, so if you haven't checked out Let's Talk on Chad Williams, definitely check that out. So anyway, as we move forward, there are certain things that happen here, and I tried to talk this the other night, and then got hit with some of this other stuff that was going on. But, you know, hey, I'm over it, and we're moving forward. And tonight, it's kind of in between tonight and morning, so my apologies. It's like one of those things, like when you work like third shifts and for years, it's kind of like we always joke. It's like, yeah, you can pretty much say good night or good morning. It's pretty much all the same. So as we move forward on this, I want to talk about, so that's this area, and about, everyone asked me, is there anything that's weird or stuff that happens? Because there's a graveyard on the place that I stay. There's or where I stay most of the time. I'm gone so much, it's hard to say that I'm actually on that location. And in between the two rivers. And of course, there was a hunting ground in this area for the Native Americans due to the fact that the amount of arrowheads and things that we found in the fields when they were being plowed, or just in general on these locations that I grew up around. There's a lot of interesting stuff here. Now, whether or not there was any haunting, that's debatable. Mainly because there's never really been. I don't think there's never really been any major investigation to this. But we'll talk about a little bit of the story I know, and some of the kayakers that I know currently that kayak the Gasper River area into the Barren and come around. So my apologies. Oh man, talk about getting started wrong. But anyway. We'll talk about this, and like I said, I have no references to this other than the story I'm about to tell you. And I don't even know that that's necessarily a haunting, but as we'll take it as maybe unknown phenomena that we can't explain, maybe something like that. So anyway, I grew up in this valley and lived there until I was about 19 years old, and came back in 95 and lived out here in the area for quite a while, and in and out. Also lived in town for a while when I was running a certain business in the early 90s into the early 2000s. So all of this is very known to me and a few other people. And like I said, my kayakers have told me that they've heard some weird things in that area too that don't make sense. But like I said, I don't think it's ever been investigated. I don't think it's ever been, I can't find anything on it. So, but it's just an interesting story. And we'll talk with, so when I was growing up, so things were a lot different back then. You know, if you were a kid, you could do a lot of different things that you couldn't do now. Like, I ran we had a John boat, and I ran the boat basically from the time I was 6 years old to the time we left or the time my family left Georgia. I ended up in Georgia later, because I had other things going on in my life. So I would run the boat as far as piloting the boat, and never sheared a pin, which is kind of ironic because this is if anybody knows anything about what I'm talking about. This was a very rough river to navigate, both Barren and Gasper, especially on the lower end of Barren and below the Greencastle Dam. And so I did something my dad said that no one else had done. He said, well, you managed to do this and never shear one. So, in the entire time I ran it, and he managed to do a couple in that same time frame when I wasn't running the boat, which is ironic. But he used to talk about that. He said it's amazing how he has learned how to navigate that river so well from the time he was 6. And like I said, things were different back then. I'm a little older, so things not done the same way these days, and laws and all that stuff, which are understandable, I suppose. I mean, some things I understand are for certain protections, but then again, I had this all under control. So I don't know, maybe it's more my adventure experience, inside of me now because of that, and my time and other things that I did. And pardon me, my voice is having a little bit of trouble this morning. As I said, I've had some difficulty over the last few weeks, and it's just come to a head. So I just want to say that one of the first ones is, for us, we knew this story, me and my dad. We were going down the river, and we're probably maybe about a half a mile down from what's known as the Sally's Rock area. You can look this up. Sally's Rock is an area that is I'm not sure if it's on a register or anything, but I know it's known because there used to be very easy navigation of the river at one time, and this woman named Sally, she used to come out on the bridge and throw the mail down to the barges and stuff like that. There was a post office up there, I think, is my understanding. And of course, I know the current owners, and me and Jay Farrell. I think if you remember the pilot episode, or if you've heard me talk about Jay Farrell, we got permission to go up there and shoot some pictures, but we didn't have models or anybody else with us. So I had talked to them at one point, not that, well, I guess it's been a few years back now when me and him did that. And so we did that, and we didn't hear anything weird or anything over there. Of course, we're in the daytime. Now, this was like, I'd say shortly after dark in the summer, so it was fairly late. Back probably when I was about maybe 13, 14, if I remember correctly. I remember trying to remember some of these things exactly when they happened and how they happened as far back as that goes. You can get some difficulty in remembering exactly, except for the things that stick out in your mind. Those things that stick out in your mind, I think they'll stay with you no matter what, unless something goes wrong with you medically. I think pretty much those things stick with you. Anyway, we were down the river, and all of a sudden, now there's no sharing the pins. This motor just stops, dead stop, which is not necessarily something that wouldn't happen, because sometimes you gotta like prime stuff, gasoline. This is back in gasoline. Long story. You'd have to, but I think some people that listen probably know what I'm talking about. But if all the things that you normally would do doesn't work. Now here you are downriver, and this has always been a very swift river, very difficult river. If you don't know what I'm talking about, it's very kind of swift water. A lot of times we had to be on the sides, and we did commercial fishing at one time. We had a commercial license for trout lining and stuff like that. So yeah, I grew up a little different than what I think some people think that I grew up. The locals know, I think, a little bit about how I grew up, from cutting wood on our land, to cleaning it off, brush piles. A lot more physical labor than people really realize. Which a lot of that didn't start till I was 11 on the land after we had bought this particular piece of land here in the Warren County area. So we did that, and so we're down the river, and somebody had tried to get this after I'd done everything that I'd been taught to do. Nothing was working, so it was just dead. And so he gets to working on it and tries to get it working, and and we're still drifting down. We're drifting down the river. Now we've gotten onto the sides, which is a little less swift, but trying to, just keep it not getting too far away. But we're drifting, and it's night, and we're drifting a little farther, and it's not getting. Now, at one point, you're going to, if you drift far enough, you're going to end up in Butler County at the Woodbury Dam area. So that's where we'd end up at. But I don't remember how far we drifted, but it seemed like it was like about an hour that we just kind of slowly drifted on the sides there, because I know how long it was going to take to get back after. And I can't remember this, but we'll talk about that in a minute. I'll talk about how long it took us to get back without the motor. The motor, eventually, we just couldn't figure it out. Couldn't figure it out at all. Couldn't figure out why it wouldn't start, wouldn't do anything. So, at some point, we just decided this is going to have to be, and this is against swift water. Now, let me tell you something. If you've ever paddled up current on any river, it's difficult. But a swift one, you got to stay on the sides. You got to paddle near the bank, and you have going to take time, and you're going to be exhausted beyond belief when you get back, because without that motor, this becomes an exhausting. And most of this area was no area that we could get in without walking through all kinds of forests, bottomland stuff. And at that time, and even today, it's not the most feasible idea to walk after night. For everything from the rattlesnakes to copperheads. So we do have copperheads too. So all this is not the most ideal situation by any means. So we're drifting down the river, and we're coming to the point that we decided that we would start paddling back. And of course, now like I said, I'm 13, 14. I'm not of the stature and strength that I would eventually be. And just, it's a long story. So Dad did a lot of it. I did some of it. But it was very, very, very difficult. And we would eventually get closer and closer to the Sally's Rock area, where we had only been like down just a short distance. And this is where it gets very interesting. And I had forgotten about this until someone mentioned something to me about this, that I had talked about this. And I was like, and then I started, well, yeah, actually I did remember part of that. But I said, we just thought it was people talking, But then looking back on it and looking back on the location, if they would have been coming from above, yeah, that might have been one thing, but it wasn't where it was coming from. It was more like it was coming from, literally from the river itself, which is something I never talked about because I think I probably kind of like to deal with Crystal. I kind of like, excuse me, I kind of like dismiss things up until a certain point. And I had to be reminded about part of the story because I just kind of like, yeah, I do remember that, but yeah, I don't know. I said, I don't think I ever really thought of it about being anything paranormal or anything like that. And I'm not even sure today that that's possible, but we'll tell the story and we'll see what goes on. I mean, it makes for a good story, whether that's the what the truth of the situation was, I don't know. I don't know if I'm telling this correct or not. I'm just telling the story of what happened. So, like I said, well, I mean, I know I'm correct on certain parts of this, but I'm not correct on whether or not it's a paranormal situation or something like that. And like I said, it could be either. As I've gotten older and I was reminded about the story, I got to thinking about it and I was like, yeah, I do remember this. I do remember talking about this, but wow, I can't believe you remember this. This is a friend that I'd had when I was younger. And I was like, yeah, okay. I do remember bits and pieces. I've got to think over this. So it's one of the reasons I'm thinking this now, exactly how this went down. Because sometimes over a certain period of time, if it's something that you've dismissed, I don't think you really think that much about it until you start trying to remember exactly how it all went on. Now, I've got all the main facts of the story, so, where we were at, what we were doing, and then I'll try to get through the rest of it if I can remember as much as possible. Because even my friend kind of said, well, you should know the story because you told me this story. And I was like, dude, that's a long time ago. I said, I totally dismissed that story some time ago, but yeah, I'll think it over and I'll talk about it probably. So we get up near the Sally's Rock area, and we're just getting closer and closer to the part of the valley that we lived in and I grew up in. And finally, we get, I want to say maybe, see, looking back on this, it's really difficult to remember all of this exactly like it was. It was late. We were tired. We were exhausted. And, I mean, those play into all kinds of things. You're going to hear all the noises of the river, and then suddenly, as I remember, after I had to have my memory jogged about this, off all things, we start hearing this, like, woman's voice. And it was like, where's that coming from? And we never could really make out exactly what she was saying. I want to make that perfectly clear. But it was almost like that. It was like not coming from the sides of the banks or above us, and we're coming up on Sally's Rock. There's nothing I know of anything that would have indicated. I knew of no story of anything that happened in that area. Even going back to drownings. I know where most people have drowned on this river, and it just didn't make sense. But it didn't. Again, thinking back on all of this, none of it made sense. So. And like I said, I had to have part of my memory jogged because I kind of pretty much just forgot about this story. I totally forgot about this. And I was like, Oh, yeah. I was like, yeah, that was a story with my dad, and I started thinking about it. And of course, now my dad passing, I couldn't ask him. I was like, hey, do you remember? I would love to, looking back on things now and having the podcast now, I would love to look back and say, hey, do you remember this? What exactly happened that night, or do you remember us talking about that? But those things happen, and when you don't have that person here anymore, it's difficult. So anyway, we go on, and the best I can remember, the most distinct thing that I can remember after I had my memory jogged was it was like this like weird, almost like different language, and but if you think about that and where we were at, you got to remember there's a Native American influence in this area too. So and it was like, I can't even distinguish it. It was just like this weird feminine voice, and I was like, and I do remember saying this. I was like, "What is that?" And he said, "It sounds like somebody talking, but there's no one around." I was like, "There's no one out here," and I was like, "Literally, it seems like it's coming from the center of the river." At least that's the way I remember it. And that's the way I remember saying something about, okay, I think I said something, like I said, trying to remember it the best. I think I said something to my dad eventually, like, we keep hearing this, and it's weird, and it's in a different kind of English. My dad kind of dismissed it as well, and he said, oh, it's just probably the echoes. It just sounds that way. I said, literally? I said, it sounds like it's coming from the river itself, right in this area. And he's like, no. He told me, he said it's just the way the river goes, the way the river echoes. You know how, and which he is right on some of this, that the river does echo, and you could maybe hear something from far away. But it was like it was on top of us. And at the same time, the fog has rolled in on the river. It's getting more and more difficult for us to see, even though we had lights and stuff. But when you're not running the motor, it's much, much more difficult. And you can only see like a few feet ahead of you. And it gets creepier and creepier. And I'm just like, I'm just wanting to get off this river. I'm just wanting to go home. I'm tired. I'm frustrated. I mean, like I said, I was 13, 14 years old. I can't remember exactly how old I was. I think it was 13, 14. And of course, that's going to just make you that much more frustrated, being a teenager. And I'm just like, and I think it's maybe another reason I dismissed this story over the years. And if it hadn't been for running into Jeff, I probably wouldn't even have thought about it. But it said, hey man, I listened to your podcast, don't you remember? I was like, man, I totally had forgotten about this story. So anyway, we keep getting closer and closer to where we can eventually get from where we came, where we normally tie our boats up and stuff like that. And we had a couple of different places that we would launch from. And we finally got to the one launch not too far, which they still have a private entry area there and everything. There was an old car that was there for years and years and years that a woman had driven into the river, eventually rusted all out and disappeared. But that's been many years ago. So, by the way, no death there according to what I said. So that wouldn't have been related either. And just like, wow. Keep hearing this, hearing it. And then all of a sudden, it just goes silent. And it stops. And we're at the bank. And the area that we launched the boat. And I never, ever heard that again. Not ever. And, like I said, I lived here in my early adult teens, and we've stayed on that river many, many times. And that was probably the strangest thing that ever happened. So I thought I had to talk about that, to fill in some stuff on the story night tonight, and before we get going on our upcoming guest shows. And so that's the story. Whether there was any kind of paranormal to it, don't know. But it was definitely different. And like I said, I had to think about it a little bit because my memory had to be jogged because I'd almost forgotten about it altogether. Because there's been so many other things happening in my life since. It's just, and like I said, it's such an up and down roller coaster in my life anyway. 99.9% of the time, I just kind of like, okay, oh yes, wait, what? And it's like, yeah, I do remember. Yeah, it just took me a little while. So anyway, that's the interesting story of the night, and that's for our story night here on the podcast. And I will get back with you very, very soon. Like I said, we got Gary Taylor coming up from Empty Bowls, and we got Chad Williams from Let's Talk. And hopefully I'll be on Chad's show as well. I saw Chad yesterday. Ran into him, was talking to him about, he was asking me about some things and what had been going on. And I talked to him about that, and I said, yeah, it's no big deal. I said, as you know, because he used to work with me too. He used to work with me for several years at a location that I worked at. And I told him, I said, man, you know how it goes. I don't pay any attention to that. I just keep going. And he said, yeah, you're the survival one for sure. So yeah, we're good. And so anyway, I'll be on his show, Let's Talk, soon with Chad Williams, and of course I'll have Gary Taylor on for the Empty Bowls talk about the charity and stuff here that they're here in Bowling Green, how they run everything here in Bowling Green and what they do. So we will be back soon. And anyway, I hope you've had a good night, morning, afternoon, whatever it is, whenever you're listening to the podcast. Love everyone. Hope everyone's having a great day, and just, hey, take my advice in life. Hey, if you get punched down a few times, keep getting back up, because that's all you got to get. That's all you're going to be able to do is to survive. Is to keep, and I've survived a lot of stuff. So, and I think it's well known. Locals and up here and in Northeast Georgia are well aware of the things I've survived. So, hey, keep rolling with the punches and keep moving forward. Have a great evening or morning or afternoon, as I said, wherever it is, whenever you listen to the podcast. And may God continue to bless you as well. Thank you. I'm your host, James Magnum Cook. And until next time.